better record what we're doing here.
Yes,
Jim.
well that's why I'm zooming in now. I may get rid of the voice, but...
Tell David what he's missing out on.
In 1955, 71 years old, this day, in Kempton Park, which is just very close. Our house in those days in Noordrondweg was close to the Johannesburg airport, Jan Smuts airport, which was called in those days. Your son's probably flown there. And in fact, my dad was a grader operator in those days and worked on the first runway, scraped the first runway that eventually became the international airport in Johannesburg, the airport now. And from there, because my dad was in the civil engineering and the civil construction business, we moved all over the show. And I think I must have gone to about 8 or 9 schools in my lifetime, different schools, because I started my schooling in Swaziland, in Bavaria, and very soon after that, I was there for about 2 years before we moved to Namibia, we did much work to Potchefstroom, to Botswana, we went all over the show. So I often, when I speak to my black friends, I say I'm more African than them. And Africa gets into your blood, I think. There's a little joke that says you can take the boy out of Africa, but you can never get Africa out of the boy. Having said that, I need to make a little deeper and say I've become a Aussie in every sense of the world. I just love this land. So much so that when we get on the aeroplane in Johannesburg to fly back, we now say to each other, we're going home. This is home now for us.
David's got that a little bit too.
Yes, yeah. I think it's easy to happen. It's such a beautiful land. In terms of, you asked whether I grew up in the apartheid years, or somebody asked about that here. Yes, Hendrik Verwoerd, of course, is the name that's associated with the apartheid concept. He was the prime minister in the days that apartheid was established. And there is so much new big word misinformation about that time and what was behind it. To the degree that people soon started thinking of that word apartheid as a part-hate. And it's not that. Apartheid was established by Hendrik Verwoerd, or the concept. It didn't even have that word. The moment that word went into the world, that's where things went wrong. But it was really at the heart of it. It was a prime minister who tried to uplift the Afrikaner, who had become very downtrodden after the Boer Wars, after the English Wars. Farmers, this is an uncomfortable thing to speak about in an English setting, but the fact of the matter is, of course, the fight was very much about the gold fields that were discovered there and things like that, and the whole colonialization thing. But the Boers were very capable farmers. In fact, the whole concept of what's the name for it? Guerrilla fighting was something that the Boers actually established, where small groups of people, of men, would move around easily. They were wonderful horsemen, they were all very good marksmen. And they gave the might of the English, the British Army, a very hard time. We were winning the war. We read it and you know it, and that's why eventually the whole thing started. They started putting, they burnt down the farms, the scorched earth.
Well, concentration camps.
And the concentration camps, which broke the spirit of the Afrikaner. And then the whole language thing, the Afrikaans was considered a bastard language. And so there was this big language war, there were taalstrijders, the language fighters. But the Afrikaner was a poor, struggling people. And Verwoerd said, no, we must take pride in ourselves. And so they established universities, cultural, the Afrikaanse taal en cultuur, cultural and language movements, and the Afrikaner was uplifted. And at about 1977, around about there, the Afrikaner was really, South Africa in those days was comparable to any European city in the world. It was a magnificent city. Johannesburg with its high towers, Carlton Centre, culture with theatres everywhere. And Afrikaner was very much at the heart of it. At that stage, South Africa had their own nuclear bomb, which was dismantled in the years after 82, just about. But Pelindaba, everything was built up from nothing amongst the Afrikaner themselves. They were people that really went to a lot of trouble to be at the top of their game in South Africa.
It was the first heart surgery was done there.
First heart surgery, Christian. The Roy Falk helicopter, the Apache helicopter was built on a template that was first flown in South Africa. The helmet, the sight helmet, where you shoot, the gun shoot where you look, that whole concept. There was just a thing that used this past week of a similar kind of helmet that they tried in Australia. Pilots nevertheless. And then, of course, the thing that was with the apartheid years came the whole thing of it was wrong to segregate people. It had a good purpose to it. The idea was that the Afrikaner was this group of nation that needed to be uplifted from the Arm Bloc, the poor white circumstances. But it became an almost jealous endeavor. It was at the cost of other people, and specifically the black people in the land. And that was wrong, there's no doubt about it.
So what year was it introduced?
64-ish.
And what did it mean when it came in? I mean, you're at school at that stage. Could you feel it? You know, the
yes.
change and
I'm sorry. It's an interesting question. Did you feel it? You didn't, because you grew up in that system. Now, if a fish doesn't know what water is, it's that kind of thing. So we never. I'm actually busy writing a book at the moment, and I talk about how your black friends play. You would play on the farm. Children are children, and how your equal, your black friend, same age, same size, you would say to him, "I'm going to beat you up," in colloquial Afrikaans, of course. And he would say, "I'm also going to beat you up." Now, that is the innocence of childhood. In the world outside, in the grown-up world, every white man had complete overseeing control, dominance over every black man. So when the black man would come down the street, he would take off his hat. They were nobody. They lived in huts down in the land, corrugated huts. Those were the things that was different in our family. My dad, from the very first day that I can remember, my mother, if we ever spoke to our black nanny disrespectfully, you would feel it the old discipline way. We were raised that way. In our own house, white people were not allowed to live in, black people were not allowed to live in white areas. The schools were totally segregated. Except where I started my schooling in Swaziland, which is not part of South Africa. There, the first time there were black mates and white children in the same school, and we sang God Save the Queen and Nkosi Sikelel together. Both the anthems. My upbringing, by the grace of God, I sort of traveled a different path than most of my friends, my Afrikaner friends. And then, of course, everybody in South Africa, all men go to the army. Once you, from 16 actually, if you leave school at 16, you go to the army. The year you leave school, you go to the army. It started off as a 9-month period. By the time I was old enough, it was a 2-year period. You spend 2 years with your conscription. You have to go to the army. That's where I became involved. I was selected for special services from the counterinsurgents unit. So that's where I spent my time. And today, it's a sad thing. There is now, I think, more hate. Again, to just use a popular word, I think it's overused, but there really is a hatred now amongst the people. And it's turned around because all the power has been taken away from the white people. And the black people who are in control are very much in this, what you spoke about, this whole black upliftment thing now. And if you start thinking about these things holistically, then you start to realize, you know this is wrong. And then you remember, but that means that must have been wrong in those days. And it's only, I think that's the way God grows us, raises us up, to just stop and think about the moment, but in the bigger picture of life, of eternity. And eventually you get to the point. By the way, I really believe that they should make history compulsory at school. And they should make philosophy compulsory at universities. So when people think, the thing we've lost more than anything else in our lives is thinking. Thinking is determined by what is most popular on the media. And when you've thought long and hard about these things, as you get older, you have more time to do that, I think. And I have no doubt that there's still much to be learned in life. But you get to the point where you realize all roads lead back to this simple fact that God is the creator of all things, all people, and He made us all equal, all in His image. And that shouldn't lead to a sentimental, make love not war sentimentality. But it should lead to the fact where we say, love means responsibility, it means care about one another, and even across the colour line, and that there is really no, all men were created equal. And when we say men, read Genesis and see God created man and woman He made them. It's men and women. And this whole thing, if you think about, once you've been there, you can just about draw all of the main social issues of the day, you can draw into that equation and say, you know, what is a man? What is a woman? Then you get to what is love. And ultimately, all you can do is fall down on your face before God and say, God have mercy. And we know God has. That was not the talk I was going to give.
It was really
Very worthwhile.
So just to try and end it on an optimistic note, is there any black politicians over there that sort of haven't bought into this? Is there any ones there that give you cause for optimism?
Yes, absolutely. I was just telling somebody that there's a speaker, currently there's a conference going on, it's called the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship.
London, yeah.
Yeah, and it's going on at the moment. Have you watched some of it?
Oh, I watched it last year, something. Yeah.
There's the same speaker, and I feel really foolish for it, but I don't remember his name. But there's a black speaker there. He was the leader of the opposition some years ago in Parliament. A black speaker. He spoke yesterday, and there's so much hope. He's also the head of the Democratic. They call it the Democratic Alliance there. And there's much hope. But more than just the politics. By the way, there's also the Mdlanga Commission going on at the moment. And all of the corruption is being exposed at the moment. And just yesterday, the King Lynchburg of big crime scene is now being sentenced to jail. And he was sentenced to 25 years. And he said, okay, in exchange for a lesser sentence, you can now tell on all the politicians and the generals. The police, the South African police force there is corrupted to the core. They are, in fact, a drug business. And the generals are the heads of this business. And so this is going to be exposed now. So there's lots of hope. The ANC has dropped from their perch in a big way. Their power is very much diminished. So much so that they wanted to have an election coming up. There's hope. But I also think that the world has gone so far down, so far away from God. The whole world. Stuff that's happening in England. That this is something I won't normally say where there are, in a broader audience, it's nice to speak to a bunch of blokes.
Maybe you're on the internet.
You're
not on the internet.
Yeah.
It's not going to be elbow pull.
It can be.
It can be.
It's not that bad. All I'm trying to avoid is to scare people. I don't want to be a scaremonger. But I think we are going to be in for tougher times before things will be better. Worldwide. And interestingly, I wonder whether Africa won't turn the corner before some other parts in the world. If you can avoid the influence of the media there, they still know what a man is, for instance. The concept of gay marriage, by and large, amongst the black Africans, is a foreign concept. And again, it's the moment you say the word gay, homosexual, transgender, people will say you're a hater. But the fact of the matter is, in my old church, I used to say, I'm going to put on our notice board one day, homosexuals welcome in this church. That doesn't mean we condone what they're doing, but it doesn't mean that there are any worse people than any one of us for many sins that we do. We carry in our own lives. The world is broken and we need to bow the knee before God. It's that simple. So I hope that there is hope for Africa. I still go to Zambia about once a year and go and do some work there.
You're involved with the teaching of one of those theological colleges over there, aren't you?
Yes, indeed. Joseph Theological College. It's the equivalent of the Presbyterian Church Theological College in Zambia. Small college, about 15 students in any given year. And poor. I hear people talk about poor in this land. And I think to myself, you have no idea. There are people there, those students share, 15 students share a chicken over 4 days, one chicken. And then they are lucky if they have the chicken. For the biggest part of it, it's just maize, corn, beans, sweet potatoes, that kind of thing.
So all those students, black students.
All of them are black students. Zambia is predominantly black, not like South Africa, which is sprinkling of white people.
So in Zambia, what's the predominant religion in the area?
It's always sounds silly when people say that's a good question, but it really is a good question. In the sense that the danger there is it's being infiltrated by the charismatic churches more than anything else. And then lesser dangers, but dangers nonetheless, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists. And I know those two are.
Are they influenced by, sort of missionaries that, of all persuasions?
Yes, and mainly for making money out of those vulnerable people. If you haven't had a meal for a week, and somebody comes to your house and says, you should believe in this strain of religion, then you will be rich and your children will have food. And that, of course, is the danger of what some missionaries do.
Cornelius, in poor areas like that, would that statement ring true, or would it then, like in a poor area, believing in God, would that promise have been rich and ever be fulfilled?
Well,
if it's a false promise.
Well, that's the thing. They cling to the hope.
Yes.
And then when they are disillusioned, they just fall away totally, and they become anti-religious. And that is the big danger. So I believe the way that you preach there, or speak there, or minister there, is to explain that God never promises that things will be well, that He is not going to give you a loaf of bread, but He is right there beside you as you are hungry, as your children are hungry around you. And that's a difficult thing to explain, but for those who, by the grace of God, get to believe it, they are then comforted by the reality of God's grace.
So is it a Muslim influence?
Yes, it's a growing influence. Of course, Northern Africa is dangerously Muslim.
Yes. Yes.
Chinese in there, are they?
The Chinese are everywhere, and the Chinese they own the economic infrastructure.
Yeah.
They own pretty much a significant part of South African mines and farms and things like that.
Namibia's been there too with the
Namibia.
gold.
Yes, Namibia, the diamond fields on the west coast of Namibia. That's a large part of my life was lived in Namibia, Keetmanshoop. And that's another just a wonderful, it's a desert land. It's just the most gorgeous, honest to goodness land.
So Desmond Tutu, he was a unifier, was he?
He was, but he was also he was a sniper, I think, Tony Abbott. He again, I used to be a journalist quite a few years in my life. The largest chunk of my ministry was spent being a journalist. And Desmond and the media made Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, let me just say something about that quickly. Both of them, they turned them into demigods. The truth of the matter is, just to start with Nelson Mandela first. By the way, I met him a few times. I have a book in my, if anybody ever comes to visit me, they made me I had a big plaque with a picture of him the year after he was inaugurated as president. He came out of jail the year our daughter was born. And his brother was his private secretary. And so he signed this plaque, and I have a book in which he wrote in the front to a worthy journalist. But the fact of the matter is, I got into trouble here in Australia because by then I was at my 5th year of ministry at Rosewall when he died, or somewhere in the middle of it all. And ABC journalist came to me and said, did I want to comment on it, knowing that we have quite a large South African congregation. And I said, well, as it happens, tomorrow I'm going to do a service, commemoration service for Nelson Mandela. And they said, could they come? I said, yeah, sure. And in my sermon, I said, the point I was trying to make is we should not make gods of people. We should not bow down before false gods. And we should not forget that Nelson Mandela, and this is the honest truth, he was an armed terrorist. He was caught. He wasn't put into jail for no reason. He was caught in a house where they had stored up bombs in the bottom of the building. And at that time, the ANC had a campaign going on. They would go to what you would call Macca's. We have rugby bars there. And when the men were at work during the day and the women went for a cup of tea at Macca's in the mornings, that's where they planted the bombs. He was a terrorist. I have only admiration for the man. He was one of the greatest leaders there ever was. If he was a younger man, I think he could have had some success in unifying people. He certainly, after he came out of jail, but it took him, however long it was, I don't remember now anymore. It took him the training of being at Robben Island for those years.
He moralized he started on the wrong track.
Yeah.
But he finished up okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Here's one for the memoirs, Bruce. I met Desmond Tutu. I didn't meet him. I imposed myself on him. Desmond Tutu in the Captain's Club at New York. He was, like waiting for his flight, and I said to my daughter, I'm going to go over and say hello to him. She said, don't you dare. And he went to the toilet, and I went in there, and he was just washing his hands. And I said, Bishop Tutu, I just want to say hello, and I admire your work and all that kind of stuff. He says, you're Australian. And he says, we're winning the cricket.
Just about Desmond Tutu. Yeah. He was a lovely man. Again, he was a lovely man. And of course, he headed the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And that resulted in a lot of terrorists being pardoned for the stuff they did. And less so the white terrorists who were actually the police force. The country was for a long time run by the generals, the South African police force, white generals, under a nationalist Christian understanding of things. But still, they had the pass laws, just to give you an idea. whereby in the heart of the apartheid era, there would be a siren, like a bomb siren, go off at 9 o'clock at night in every white town in the land. And then all the blacks had to be out of the town. And if you were in town, you had to have what they call the passbook. And it had to be signed, you had to have permission to be in town, and the reason had to be stated on the pass. And if you didn't, they put you in jail. So and if you were unlucky to be caught on a Friday afternoon, you'd stay in jail till Monday morning, because everybody had to go through the court system. We had an excellent court system, but there were other things that were wrong.
So what was the point of having all the blacks out of town by 9 o'clock?
It was a safety thing.
Right.
And it worked. There was never, it's like here, we don't have keys to our house. Even in Roseville, we never locked the door. And it was like that in South Africa. You could leave your bicycle out, or children's bicycle would be out on the front garden. Nobody would take it. Like we found it here. It seems to be, it might be changing a bit now. But that's the way it was. Yeah, and then of course that was one of the things that was wrong. You cannot have well, they weren't seen really as citizens. They were not seen as citizens. The black people were seen as sojourners. Is that the word?
Yes.
Sojourners. Yes, sojourners, is that the word? And they were cheap labor. And all of that was wrong. There was so much that was wrong with apartheid. But what the world thinks the problem was, it was never the problem. The problem was a hard thing. The problem was it wasn't that the white people hated the black people. It was white people fighting for their identity, for their worth in life. And they did it wrong, there's no doubt about it. They did it unlovingly. But the world in which I grew up, my father, in our house, we saw our black workers as part of the family. In many a house, the people would come in the afternoons, we would have, we call it boekenvat, read the books. We would have Bible readings, and the black people would come in the house. They wouldn't sit on the chairs. They wouldn't have a cup of tea if they had tea in the house, they had a cup under the sink, tin cup under the sink. Those things were the wrong things. But there was so much less hate than there is in the modern era.
Was your father seen as radical having in the house?
My father was, for having it in the house. In fact, another story about my dad, he appointed a black engineer. At that time, there was one university, Witwatersrand University, who started accepting students of color, and they could study engineering. And some of the great dentists and engineers came from Wits University. And my dad, who worked at that stage for LTA, Lewis Thompson and Anglo American, he was the general foreman by that stage. He hired, Enoch was his name, a black engineer, recently qualified, graduated black engineer. But he couldn't appoint him as an engineer, he had to appoint him as a density tester. But my dad used him as an engineer.
Sorry, I have to go and get my bus. We're away for half an hour.
Oh, so thank you very much.
I think we can probably call this the wrap, shall we say.
Yeah.
And thank you for a wonderful personal testimony. And some other time.
We won't get to this today.
But that was so good. I'm so glad I've captured that. Hopefully the sound on that recording will come, because this is a great reminiscence that I think others would benefit to hear if you're willing for that to be.
Hang on, I didn't realise we were all being recorded.
Please record it.
You've got this.
Right,